cycle, Kalman calls the cultural cycle, because its product at the end was cultures, you might say. The tighter grouping and the beginnings and formations of ideals and those kinds of things, those are all starting. The cultural cycle began 102,000 years ago. And a day or a night in this cycle now is 8,000 years. We're starting to get to some time periods that are a little more manageable in the mind, right? 8,000 years for each of the 13 days and nights in the cultural period. And the consciousness development of this period is reason or justification. Reason and justification. Just keep that in mind. We'll go back over this in a minute. The next cycle is the national cycle. And the national cycle began in 3100 BC. It's from our previous talk, right? That other calendar, the long count of the jaguar priests, Packle-Votans. And each day and each night is now just 400 years. Now let me put that in a little bit of perspective at this point. Down here at the cellular cycle, things happened at a period of about 1.26 billion years. And what I'll do in a second here, because if we went through each and every day and all the things that happen, again, we would be here forever. And you can very easily research all this because this is nothing less than our history as we know it. I'm not presenting you anything that you cannot find in the history textbooks or, of course, online right now. We're just giving you a little, maybe different interpretation of it. But we're going to focus a lot on what happens during the 5th day and 5th night in each of these cycles, because that is, as we said, a period of really noticeable, visible change in the development of an organism or consciousness, okay? And when we get to, say, the cultural period, 102,000 years ago, each day and each night's 8,000 years. A lot of time. But we get to 3100 BC, which encompasses our history, and the days and nights are 400 years each. Maybe a good way to think of it is this. About every 400 years, historically speaking, when we look at it, there was a change of mind. There was a change of mind. And this change of mind, as we're fixing to see, as we'll chart, tends to happen globally. All across the world, all at about the same time, everybody somehow comes to about the same realizations about different things. And that's part of what's wonderful about this system that the Maya developed for us, is that it shows us, it allows us to see how consciousness has been developing towards the end, the ultimate goal of God's plan, reuniting. Okay? The national cycle, the consciousness development was law. Law. The law was laid down. Good, evil, right, wrong. Law. That's the consciousness development that by the end of this cycle was implanted and would then carry over to the next cycle, which is called the planetary cycle. That up there. Planetary cycle began a little closer now, 1755 A.D. What a year. Not too far, if you think about it, from a lot of major changes from the history that preceded it, and what happened right there. We'll get into that in a lot more detail. And each day and each night of this cycle lasts 20 years. About every 20 years, during this period of time, we can see major changes of consciousness, major developments of technologies and various things that follow this rhythm. In fact, when Binky and I were having discussions about these things the other night, and she asked me about how these things get charted. And it's long, for a long time, well, before anybody was talking about Maya, or their charting consciousness, was noted by mathematicians and statisticians that, you've probably heard this before, the rise and fall of hemlines in the West, hemlines, matches almost exactly the rise and fall of great civilizations throughout history if you put them in the proper context, right? Rise and fall of civilizations takes place over 5,000 years. Rise and fall of hemlines takes place in matters of decades, but believe it or not, they chart out almost exactly the same. Why is that? Well, here's another example. Because we live currently in the planetary cycle. I'll point that out in more detail in a second, but we're still in this cycle. Consciousness is changing every 20 years. Well, when, again, more scientists and people who get paid to think about these things, unlike us who have to actually work for a living, started looking at something that was called the generation gap. Right? Why don't those young people understand things? Why do those old people so square? Well, what they found was that the generation gap is about 20 years. About 20 years. And in fact, I'm approximating here, the actual amount of time there is really just over 18 and a half years that this takes place. I'm just approximating because it's much easier for us to do that for our purposes here. Okay. So, I point that out only to say that these are things that you can look at in your life around you in order to see as a gauge. Is this true at all? Does this bear any weight? Okay? The next cycle is called the galactic cycle. And the galactic cycle began in January of 1999. And each day and each night of the galactic cycle lasts for 360 days. Just short of a year. Okay? During the galactic cycle. I'm sorry, I didn't give that, did I? Power. Power. Or, that's Coleman's. I'm going to add one word, or two words to it. Consolidation of power. Consolidation of power. That was the consciousness development of the planetary cycle. The galactic cycle is what Kalaman calls ethics, what I'm going to also call truth. We'll talk about how that all impacts here in just 1 second. So, we can see now 9 levels of creation working under these 13 heavens, or 7 days and 6 nights. This is the operating principle that guides how things evolve in each level. This stays the same. It only takes place 20 times faster each time we move up the pyramid, or each level we move up in creation. So, what were some of the things that were happening during these times? 5th day and 5th night. All right. During the cellular cycle, 5th day and 5th night of the cellular cycle was about 6.5 billion years ago. Birth of the solar system. That's the birth of our solar system. Our sun, the planets getting formed, all taking place. Still pretty junky, but that was the fruit. That was the flower. 5th night of that cycle was about 5 billion years ago, which was 4.5, 5 billion years ago. Earth's early formation, followed by 250 million years of non-stop meteor and comet bombardment. Hell on Earth, because that's what it was. Total, constant bombardment from space of all the junk that was left over from the formation of our solar system, hitting all the planets, coming down hard on Earth. But it's a good thing it did, because we wouldn't be here if all that junk hadn't got here. Because one of the main things that was brought here to us from out there during this 5th night period of intense chaos and destruction was water. Water. And was that a crucial thing for the development of consciousness? You bet it was. You bet it was. Okay, the mammalian cycle. Mammalian cycle, that is. 5th day was about 315 million years ago. This is when life came out of the oceans. This is when life developing in the oceans and starting to come out of the oceans. Very, very exciting. The 5th night of the mammalian cycle, right here, 97% of all life on Earth is extinct. Extinction level event. Poof. Everything that had happened all the way up to that point, except for 3% of it that was alive, is gone. 5th night of that cycle. The familial cycle. We don't really have a whole lot of information, to be honest with you. We know that, like I said, that there were the starting formations of relationships and things like that. It's when they estimate that humans and other animals capable developed color vision. We really don't have a whole lot of information about that time to talk about. So we'll move on to the tribal cycle. About 800,000 years ago in the tribal cycle, 800,000 years ago would have been the 5th day. 800,000 years ago is what we currently know to be about the time that man was first using fire. They found it in modern-day Israel